The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. "Why does your daughter call me mommy?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The conference room suddenly felt too small, too intimate for this conversation. Mark's eyes, usually confident and direct during their business meetings, now glistened with unexpected tears. His answer would change everything between them, and leave her completely speechless. If you've ever wondered how the smallest moments can transform our lives forever, this story will touch your heart. Like and subscribe to see more real-life stories that remind us of the power of human connection. Mark Wilson never planned on being a single father. At 34, he had imagined a different life, one where he wasn't juggling board meetings and ballet recitals, financial reports and fever medications. But life rarely follows our carefully constructed plans. 4 years ago, his wife Eliza had walked out of their home and never returned, leaving behind their 2-year-old daughter Emma and a note that simply read, "I can't do this anymore." The abandonment had been sudden and devastating. One day they were a family, and the next, Mark was alone with a toddler who kept asking where her mommy had gone. The first year had been the hardest. Mark had been a mid-level manager at Horizon Technologies, a promising tech firm in the city. His career had been on an upward trajectory, with late nights and weekend work being the norm. But suddenly, those extra hours became impossible. Daycare closed at 6, babysitters cancelled last minute, and Emma needed stability more than Mark needed promotions. His boss at the time, Richard, had been less than understanding. "We all have personal problems, Wilson," he'd said dismissively when Mark requested more flexible hours. "But this company doesn't run on excuses." 2 months later, Mark was let go during a restructuring. The severance package was decent, but the blow to his confidence was substantial. He'd failed at marriage, and now he was failing at providing for his daughter. It was Emma who kept him going. Her small hand in his as they walked through the park, her giggles when he made silly faces during dinner, her sleepy, "I love you, Daddy," each night, these moments became his anchor in a storm of uncertainty. Mark had spent weeks sending out resumes, attending interviews during Emma's preschool hours, and networking whenever he could find a babysitter. The rejections piled up, each one chipping away at his resolve. Then came the call from Innovate Solutions, a smaller but rapidly growing company known for its innovative approach not just to technology, but to workplace culture. The CEO herself wanted to interview him based on a recommendation from a former colleague. Catherine Chen had built Innovate Solutions from the ground up. At 38, she was already featured in business magazines as one of the most promising entrepreneurs in the tech industry. Known for her brilliant mind and no-nonsense approach, she had a reputation for being fair but demanding. Mark had been nervous walking into her office, especially when he noticed the interview was scheduled for 4:30 p.m., dangerously close to Emma's daycare pickup time. He'd arranged for a neighbor to collect Emma, but the thought of starting a new job relationship by discussing his childcare constraints made his stomach knot. Catherine had been direct from the moment he sat down. "Your resume is impressive, but there's a 2-year gap in your employment. Explain that to me." Mark had taken a deep breath and decided honesty was his only option. "I became a single father rather suddenly. My previous employer wasn't flexible with my new family situation, so we parted ways. I've been freelancing while looking for the right opportunity, one that would allow me to be both the professional I am and the father my daughter needs." He'd expected dismissal, perhaps a polite but firm explanation about the company's expectations for dedication and long hours. Instead, Catherine had studied him thoughtfully. "What arrangements do you have for your daughter now?" she'd asked. "She's in daycare until 6. I have backup options for emergencies, but they're not unlimited," Mark had admitted. Catherine had nodded, making notes. "And what would your ideal work arrangement look like, if you could design it yourself?" The question had caught him off guard. No interviewer had asked him that before. "I'd work full-time, with the flexibility to occasionally adjust my hours if Emma has a doctor's appointment or school event. I'd make up any time in the evenings after she's asleep. I'm not looking for reduced hours, just some understanding that sometimes my daughter has to come first." Catherine had put down her pen then. "Mr. Wilson, I built this company while caring for my mother through cancer treatments. I know what it's like to balance work with the people who need you. We have a results-oriented culture here, not a clock-watching one. If you can deliver excellent work, I don't particularly care if you do it between 9 and 5 or between 6 and midnight." Mark had been hired as a project manager that day, with a salary that exceeded his expectations and a flexible schedule that made single parenthood manageable for the first time in years. The first few months at Innovate had been challenging but rewarding. Mark threw himself into his work, determined to prove Catherine's faith in him wasn't misplaced. He excelled at coordinating teams and streamlining processes, often working late into the night after Emma was asleep. Catherine noticed. 6 months in, she promoted him to senior project manager. A year later, he became director of operations, working directly with her on the company's most important initiatives. Their professional relationship was built on mutual respect. Catherine valued Mark's practical approach and attention to detail, while he admired her vision and decisive leadership. They made an effective team, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. But it was an unexpected crisis that first brought Catherine into Mark and Emma's personal lives. Emma had been 6 when she came down with pneumonia. Mark had been in the middle of a crucial client meeting when the school nurse called. Without hesitation, he had apologized to the clients and prepared to leave. Catherine, seeing his distress, had stepped in smoothly. "Gentlemen, I'll be taking over this meeting. Mark, go get your daughter. Keep me updated." Later that night, as Mark sat beside Emma's hospital bed watching her labored breathing, his phone had buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Do you need anything? Food? Coffee? Someone to spell you for a few hours?" He'd been surprised by the offer but too exhausted to decline. Catherine had arrived an hour later with a bag of essentials, snacks, a phone charger, a change of clothes for him, and a stuffed unicorn for Emma. "My mother always said hospitals need more unicorns," she'd explained with a small smile, settling into the chair beside him. They'd talked that night, not as CEO and employee, but as two people with their guards down. Catherine had shared stories about caring for her mother, who had passed away 2 years earlier. Mark had opened up about Eliza's abandonment and his fears of failing Emma. "You haven't failed her," Catherine had said firmly. "You're here. That matters more than anything else." Emma had recovered, but something had shifted between Mark and Catherine. She began to ask about Emma during their meetings, genuinely interested in the little girl's progress. When Mark mentioned Emma's upcoming school science fair, Catherine had offered suggestions based on her own childhood experiments. "Bring her by the office sometime," Catherine had said casually. "I'd like to meet this young scientist." Emma had been wide-eyed with excitement when Mark finally brought her to Innovate Solutions. Catherine had given her a special tour, showing her the labs and introducing her to the engineers. She'd knelt down to Emma's level, answering her endless questions with patience and genuine engagement. "Your boss is so nice, Daddy," Emma had whispered loudly as they left. "She doesn't seem like a boss at all." The visits became more frequent. Sometimes Emma would sit quietly in Mark's office after school, drawing or doing homework while he finished his work. Catherine often stopped by, bringing Emma little science kits or books about famous women in technology. A natural friendship developed between the CEO and the little girl. Emma admired Catherine's confidence and intelligence, while Catherine seemed to enjoy Emma's curiosity and enthusiasm. Mark watched their bond grow with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. The company holiday party marked another turning point. Mark had been hesitant to bring Emma, but Catherine had insisted all families were welcome. Emma had spent weeks deciding on her outfit, eventually choosing a green velvet dress that made her look, in Mark's biased opinion, like the most beautiful child in the world. At the party, Emma had been shy at first, clinging to Mark's hand as they navigated the crowd of adults. Then Catherine had appeared, elegant in a simple black dress, her face lighting up at the sight of Emma. You look absolutely gorgeous, she'd told Emma, who had beamed with pride. Would you like to help me judge the gingerbread house competition? Emma had looked up at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. He'd watched as his daughter happily took Catherine's hand, their heads bent together in serious discussion as they examined the sugary creations. Later, as the evening wound down, Mark had found them sitting together in a quiet corner, Catherine teaching Emma how to fold elaborate paper napkin designs. "Daddy, look what I learned!" Emma had exclaimed, proudly displaying a napkin swan. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he'd said, genuinely impressed. "Did you thank Ms. Chen for teaching you?" Emma had looked confused. "Who?" "Ms. Chen," Mark had repeated, gesturing toward Catherine. "Your dad's boss," Catherine had added with a smile. Emma had giggled. "I know who you are. You're Catherine." The familiarity had surprised Mark. He hadn't realized Catherine had told Emma to use her first name. But Catherine had seemed pleased, her usual professional reserve softening as she helped Emma create another napkin creation. As winter turned to spring, Catherine became a regular presence in their lives. She joined them for pizza and movie nights, taught Emma how to code simple games, and once spent an entire Saturday helping them build a treehouse in Mark's small backyard. "You don't have to do this," Mark had said as they struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of lumber. "I'm sure you have better things to do with your weekend." Catherine had wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. Without her usual polished business attire, dressed in jeans and a faded t-shirt, she looked younger, more carefree. "Actually, I don't," she'd replied. "This is exactly where I want to be." The words had hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Mark had simply nodded and handed her another nail. Emma's 7th birthday arrived in early summer. Mark had planned a small party at their home with a few of Emma's friends from school. To his surprise, Catherine had asked if she could help. "I make a mean birthday cake," she'd offered. "It's my grandmother's recipe." The day of the party, Catherine had arrived early, arms full of baking supplies and decorations far more elaborate than Mark had planned. Together, they had transformed the backyard into an enchanted garden, with fairy lights and paper flowers hanging from every surface. The cake had been a masterpiece, 3 layers of chocolate with buttercream frosting, decorated with fondant butterflies that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Emma had been ecstatic, throwing her arms around Catherine's waist. "This is the best birthday ever," she declared. Later, after the other children had gone home and Emma was playing with her new toys, Mark and Catherine had sat on the porch steps, sharing the last of the birthday cake. "Thank you," Mark had said quietly. "You made today special for her." Catherine had smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I always wanted children," she'd admitted. "But building the company took all my time, and then caring for my mother, life just went in a different direction." Mark had studied her profile in the fading light. "It's not too late, you know." She'd turned to look at him then, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment, Mark thought she might say more, but Emma had called from inside, breaking the spell. Summer passed in a blur of work projects and weekend adventures. Catherine joined them for hikes, beach trips, and backyard barbecues. To anyone watching, they might have looked like a family. Mark found himself thinking of Catherine at odd moments, smiling at a joke she would appreciate, making mental notes to tell her about Emma's latest accomplishments, wondering what she would think of a book he was reading. He told himself it was natural to think about a friend and colleague who had become important to both him and Emma. But friends didn't make his heart race when they walked into a room. Friends didn't populate his dreams at night. Friends didn't make him wonder what it would be like to cross the careful boundaries they had established. The new school year brought changes. Emma started 2nd grade with enthusiasm, proudly wearing the backpack Catherine had helped her select. Mark was promoted again, this time to Chief Operations Officer, working even more closely with Catherine as the company expanded. Their professional relationship remained impeccable, but Mark became increasingly aware of the tension that sometimes crackled between them when they were alone. A lingering glance, a touch that lasted a beat too long, conversations that danced around the edges of something deeper than friendship. One evening in late September, they were working late at the office, finalizing plans for a major product launch. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago. Emma was at a sleepover with her best friend, giving Mark a rare night without parenting responsibilities. "We should celebrate," Catherine had said as they finally closed their laptops. "This launch is going to change everything for the company." They'd ended up at a small wine bar a few blocks from the office, tucked into a corner booth with a bottle of red wine between them. Away from work, with the soft lighting and intimate setting, it was impossible to maintain the professional distance they usually kept. The conversation had flowed easily, moving from work to books to travel dreams to childhood memories. Catherine had laughed more than Mark had ever heard before, her usual composed demeanor giving way to something more relaxed, more open. "I've never told anyone at work about my mother's illness," she'd admitted after her second glass of wine. "You're the only one who knows how close I came to giving up the company to care for her." "Why did you tell me?" Mark had asked. Catherine had looked at him directly then, her dark eyes serious. "Because you understand what it means to put someone else before yourself. Because you don't see it as a weakness." The walk back to their cars had been quiet, both aware that something had shifted between them. Standing in the empty parking garage, Catherine had looked up at Mark, a question in her eyes. "Mark," she'd begun, her voice soft. His phone had rung then, Emma's friend's mother calling to say Emma was homesick and wanted to come home. The moment had passed, unresolved. Autumn brought school projects and holiday preparations. Catherine continued to be a regular presence in their lives, but Mark sensed she was being more careful, maintaining a slight distance that hadn't been there before. Emma, however, grew increasingly attached. She talked about Catherine constantly, saved drawings to show her, and asked when she would visit next with the eagerness usually reserved for favorite relatives. The shift happened so gradually that Mark almost missed it. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon in November. The three of them were in Mark's living room, Emma on the floor working on a school project, Mark and Catherine on the couch reviewing some reports. Emma had looked up from her work, brow furrowed in concentration. "Can you help me with this part, Mommy? I can't get it right." The room had gone completely still. Mark had frozen, his eyes darting to Catherine, whose face reflected his own shock. Emma, oblivious to the bombshell she'd dropped, was still holding out her project expectantly. Catherine had recovered first, sliding down to the floor beside Emma. "Let me see what you're working on," she'd said calmly, though Mark could see her hands trembling slightly. Later, after Emma was in bed, they'd sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of tea growing cold between them. "I'm so sorry," Mark had begun. "I don't know why she said that. I'll talk to her tomorrow, explain that you're not." "Don't," Catherine had interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Don't make her feel bad about it." "But it's not fair to you," Mark had insisted. "She's putting you in an impossible position." Catherine had been quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. "What if it's not impossible?" she'd finally asked, looking up to meet his gaze. Mark's heart had stuttered in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love Emma. And I'm saying..." She'd taken a deep breath. "I'm saying that I love you too, Mark. I have for a long time now." The confession had hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Because the truth was, Mark had fallen in love with Catherine months ago, perhaps from the moment she'd shown up at the hospital with a stuffed unicorn and understanding in her eyes. "I love you too," he'd said simply, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But this is complicated. You're my boss. And Emma, she's already lost one mother. If this doesn't work out..." "I know," Catherine had acknowledged. "That's why I've never said anything before. But when she called me Mommy today... Mark, I want to be worthy of that name."